Good evening and welcome to From Kitchen to Cookbook, Publishing Trends and Insights. Just to make sure everybody's in the right place. My name is Karen Romano and I'm the president of the Book Industry Guild of New York. And I have to say I am delighted to open the meeting tonight, which, as many of you may know, was originally scheduled for March when the world looked a little bit different. But we are all very excited to have such an illustrious panel with us tonight. And I'd like to begin by introducing our moderator. Laura Shapiro was a columnist at The Real Paper in Boston before beginning a 16-year run at Newsweek, where she covered food, women's issues, and the arts, and won several journalism awards. Her essays, reviews, and features have also appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Condé Nast Traveler, Gourmet, Gastronomica, Slate, and many other publications. Her first book was Perfection Salad, Women and Cooking at the Turn of the Century. She is also the author of Something from the Oven, Reinventing Dinner in 1950s America, which was named in the Wall Street Journal as one of the 5 best books on American food, and Julia Child, which won the award for literary food writing from the International Association of Culinary Professionals. Her work is represented in the Library of America's American Food Writing and the Virago Book of Food. She is a frequent speaker and panelist on culinary history and has given a number of presentations at the Oxford Symposium on Food and Cookery. During 2009 to 2010, she was a fellow at the Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library, and she then became co-curator for Lunch Hour NYC, an acclaimed exhibition documenting the mingled histories of New York City and the American midday meal. Her latest book is What She Ate, 6 Remarkable Women and the Food That Tells Their Stories, which Susan Stamberg of NPR called seriously and hilariously researched culinary history. So this all sounds very enticing. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce someone who is clearly an industry expert, and we are lucky to have as our moderator, Laura Shapiro, who will introduce you to our panelists. And I will bow out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. We are meeting in strange times and in what is for me kind of an unfamiliar way. For that very reason, I have been gazing with great affection at the announcement for this event, the notice that showed up in your email, which was, of course, an homage to a truly immortal American cookbook, Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking from 1961. Here is my copy, so you can see the beloved original. I love that this book was chosen as the emblem here, because it reminds us so plainly about what makes a cookbook important. First and foremost, it is not the recipes. I'm going to go out on a limb here and speculate that nobody on this Zoom call, possibly nobody in the entire world, woke up this morning thinking, gee, what a good day to make veal Prince Orloff. Recipes come and go. What lasts is the voice, the character, the moral stance of the person that you are going to trust in the kitchen. Julia was trust personified. And in a moment like this, when we are all pretty much shaking in our shoes for any number of reasons, we want someone we can trust at the stove and everywhere else. So if you have a copy of this wonderful book, you don't have to cook from it. Just keep it in sight for the next few weeks. It might help. Of course, American home cooking has changed a lot since 1961. Cookbooks coming out today are aimed at a very different America from the one Julia lived in. The very nature of collecting and publishing recipes has changed dramatically, and our 3 panelists have lots of wisdom to share on this subject. So we will turn to them now, and I'll start by introducing each one. Jake Cohen has worked in Michelin-starred restaurants and magazine test kitchens. He's now the editorial and test kitchen director at the Feedfeed, which is a culinary website with recipes, articles, videos, and a lot more. And much of its content comes from its own very active community of food lovers. So this is kind of an ongoing crowdsourced cookbook in itself. Jake's own cookbook, his first, will be coming out next year. Penny de Los Santos is a world-traveling and award-winning photographer. She spent many years at National Geographic. Her portfolio spans more than 40 countries with a great deal of work with food and cooking, both still photography and video. She has some wonderful examples on her website, and I urge you to take a look. Francis Lam is the editor-at-large at Clarkson Potter and the host of the Splendid Table on public radio. He's written for all the good publications, including Gourmet and the New York Times, and in TV, he's been a judge on Top Chef Masters. His work has won a slew of awards, and the Washington Post calls him the voice of America's food culture. So let's start by looking at, right now, the age of COVID. From your perspective, and this is each of you, have the last 6 or 7 months of living with a pandemic really changed people's relationships with food and cooking? Or is this just one of these things that food writers write about? But if this is a real change, how is that going to affect your work? How has it affected it, and how will it affect it? The kinds of things that are going to become important for you to focus on. Jake, let's start with you.
I would say that it's pretty much divided into two parts. On one side, we've seen this huge kind of push away from, I guess, how people were typically really reacting with food content. It used to be like, great, this looks beautiful. I'm going to like it. I'm going to read it. I'm going to share this with someone. Now they're in this position in which they have to nourish themselves. If you have to remember, like the beginning of the pandemic, we really didn't know a lot about Corona. I would say a lot of people were worried. They were unaware in terms of how you could get it. Was takeout safe or grocery safe? How should I get my food? Do I just cook through all of the cans of beans in my pantry until God knows when? And it really started to get people thinking, at least personally, in terms of what recipe content we were seeing people resonate with the most. And that was the comfort food. And then once comfort food kind of faded away and people had kind of settled in, it just became like this opportunity to really learn how to cook. And if they're going to be stuck in quarantine, if they're going to be stuck at home, this is this wonderful opportunity. And really on both sides of the coin, of both super easy recipes that don't add any more stress to this already stressful time, but also project recipes, because now people have a lot more time. They don't have to throw everything in an Instant Pot because they can just throw it in their Dutch oven and let it cook all day since they're working from home. But then the other side of it, which I think was really beautifully seen, at least through a lot of my work, writing about Jewish food and this concept of, so far, we haven't seen it yet in terms of holidays, and we're going to see that coming up soon. But we've had Passover, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur all happen within quarantine. And there's this new push in the sense of we have a next generation kind of being thrusted into cooking a lot of their family recipes that they normally would have relied on large gatherings in which some aunt or grandmother or parent would cook. And for the first time, we're seeing people braise their first brisket, make their first challah, and I think you can see that really across the board when it comes to culture, and that's going to continue, especially as we get to Thanksgiving. I'm sure there's going to be thousands and thousands of people cooking their first turkey.
So holidays are going to kickstart this thing that has been rolling along for months. You feel, and you've seen it already in some. Francis, what have you noticed?
I mean, I think I really appreciate hearing Jake's comments, because he has, in the course of his work, he has daily real-time data points on what people are doing, right? And what people are looking for, what people are motivated by, and what people are motivating towards. For me, especially working as a cookbook editor, our job is to try to see what will be meaningful 2 years from the moment we acquire the title, right? So that has been thrown in a bit of a tizzy, but I think there is a sort of natural instinct to imagine a lot of the kind of different scenarios readers might be in that Jake has described so in such a detailed way. For me, there's also another side of my work, which is, as a host of a radio show. And our show had been very much focused on, I mean, the Splendid Table is a show that's been around for almost 25 years. I think this is actually our 25th year. And for 22 of those 25 years, the host was the founding host, Lynn Rossetto Casper, who's a hero of mine and really amazing person. And although she was certainly very interested in culture, certainly very interested in politics, interested in seeing so many issues of the world through the lens of food, the show had a reputation for being a show about cooking, a show where you could turn it on your public radio station and hear her describe a meal she would make with 5 random ingredients a listener would throw at her, or do an interview with someone really about a technique or something like that. And since I've been hosting it, I'm certainly interested in those things. I was a professional cook. I've been certainly passionate about cooking for a really long time, but just sort of naturally, the show has headed more towards culture and personal stories. And when COVID hit, for us, it just seemed, we were imagining our audience being in a very different place. Our audience, as we all were, like we were all really adjusting to life. And like Jake said in the beginning, like, I don't know if people remember this because now it seems like 1,000 years ago, but there were questions of, will we have food? Is the supply chain going to break? And frankly, in a lot of ways, it probably should have. Like, we should not be able to buy hamburger for 95 cents a pound still because, people working in meat plants are all dying of COVID and so wheeling them out and wheeling more people in, and they're all undocumented workers, but whatever. We don't care. We still need our 95 cent a pound hamburger. But anyway, my point is, like, we were in such a, not just a tumultuous and scary time, but a time where it felt like even basic necessities, basic facts of our lives weren't things we had any sense of routine to fall back on. And it became a situation where I think people were not only scared and not only being inundated with news and the obvious, like, clear and present danger of the news around you, but also this sense that decision fatigue was such an intense thing. Now, like, you had to make so many active choices without knowledge, and you had to sit and think about, okay, how am I going to get to grocery shop? Okay, what am I going to make? And so we geared our show very much towards, like, real concrete cooking problems that I had as much as anyone else. Like, how do I feed myself at this moment? What is safe? Our first new episode we did was an interview with Kenji Lopez-Alt, who had done a lot of research on, how do you get food safely into your home? And, what research was telling us about groceries and takeout and all that stuff. And, now that we've all settled into a new normal, and certainly it's weird, right? Because now we have this strange, I don't want to say bifurcated existence, but a whole range or continuum of experiences where for some people COVID is more scary and relevant than ever if you're in a hot spot, and for other people who have been living with however they've managed to keep themselves safe and fed for 6 months, and they're just kind of settled into what they're going to do. So now, I think now is actually a strange time for us. Now is a harder time for us to know how to do work that readers, and in my case also listeners, need and want and will appreciate. But I think Jake has exactly right. I think culturally what's super interesting about the moment is how we're going to come out of this. Like, prior to COVID, I think that the consumer data is that 50% of all meals consumed in our country were purchased outside the home. We do not do most of our cooking at home. And obviously at home, a lot of that cooking is, even though it's considered, it's technically home cooking, but a lot of it's going to be prepared food, packaged food that you're heating up. But 50% of our meals were purchased ready to eat. The other 50%, whatever percentage of that is convenience food at home, which is, obviously like a valid solution for a lot of people in their lives. So I think what is interesting is, how will we come out of this moment? Will we say, oh my God, thank you, restaurants are back, if any of them survive, and we're just gonna go back to that and like see this moment as an incredibly painful pain in the ass that we got out, we got out from under? Or are we going to see it as a moment where we took it upon ourselves to learn to feed ourselves again? And we took it upon ourselves to learn to, I'm sure Penny can speak to this next in from her perspective, but learn to travel vicariously through our cooking, through our cookbook collections. With that world, with literally much of the world sort of closed to us, have we taken it upon ourselves to want, once we move beyond the comfort food thing, which again, Jake, I'm glad you spoke to that, how much this impacts our level of curiosity. And I don't want to say adventurousness, because I think that's like a weird colonial thing, like a colonial gaze kind of thing, but our curiosity to live even for a moment outside of what has become our very small world. So it's a really long way of saying, I don't know the answer to your question, but these are a lot of questions that I'm thinking about and in some ways wrestling with, in some ways really excited about. For other, I don't want to keep taking too much time, maybe we'll get back to that.
Well, you're bringing up a question of curiosity, that our curiosity about food. Certainly, America's food culture in the last decade or more has exploded. We're seeing culinary wandering and discovery on the internet, on television, a lot. But of course, as you say, it's now our whole lives are being lived at home and on the screen. So where does that sense of curiosity take us? Penny, your work is with visual, with the world, with being out there and collecting imagery. How does this new normal, or the weird transition that we seem to be in, with from old normal to current normal to future normal, where does that bring you?
I apologize. I'm at my dad's house and I've tried to explain to him about the Zoom call and not talking in the background, but he doesn't quite get it. So he's like taking a lot of phone calls right now. I'm sure you all can relate. I haven't really been able to do any travel assignments. And I've more become a studio photographer. So everything's kind of been tabletop, and in some cases I've collaborated with, a watercolorist for the actual food. So I would do I did an ad campaign for a water company, a water bottle company. So production in photography's changed. I'm not really traveling. I've tried to figure out a way to maybe tell those stories. But then I think about, maybe I should try to be safe. Maybe I should try to be safe for everybody else. I don't know. It's definitely an inner conflict, and I'm still trying to work through it. I did drive across the country to be with my father, who's ill. And as I was driving, I thought, maybe there's something here. It's kind of unbelievable how much fast food is being consumed right now. I can definitely tell you that. I packed a cooler full of stuff, but there were lines, like rows and rows of cars just waiting to get fast food along the highway, which was kind of it's just very strange. Or whatever, people are doing what they can.
When was this trip? When did you do that drive?
I just did it last week.
Just now. So
I feel like people are moving around now in the last few months,
Yeah.
I came to be with my father because he's not well. So my goal was to cook for him, but he's been living off of mac and cheese and potato chips.
All right.
So I don't know what's going to happen to travel photography and telling stories, narrative stories around food, and photographing people who are cooking for other people. It's an interesting time. I'm not really sure how to navigate it. I have not had any assignments related to telling stories around food. That I know. I don't know that there's a lot of those happening right now.
No, but I'm interested in your the focus you said you now have on tabletop, on working with what you do have in front of you.
Yeah.
It seems to me for some imaginative editor, there are a ton of stories about that. I know that among culinary historians, many of us have had our projects kind of halted for a little while because we can't go to this library or that library, which makes you get a lot more creative with what you can get your hands on in terms of research. Your situation is far more dramatic, but maybe it's kind of the same thing, that a sort of new focus on what is in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed everything, and you can't get ingredients like you used to, so there's a supply chain issue. Then I work out of Brooklyn, New York, so getting groceries there finding things isn't as easy as it used to be. And then you're asking people, food stylists, to go out and shop, and a lot of people don't want to do that. So then you're having it delivered. And so you've got to prep everything way in advance. And then, on set, it's me and maybe one other person, so I'm wearing like many hats. I have an art director who's maybe like zoomed in, and a client who zoomed in. It's just very different. It's a slower production, not as many shots in a day, but making do with what you can. It's what I don't know. It's strange, and I think my industry, photography, is definitely going through just a real shift. So I don't know, and I know other people, other writers, other food stylists who are definitely photographing. So I think the storytelling and how people are storytelling, I think people are wearing a bunch of different hats and using those tools that they've kind of just discovered, and they're having to tell those stories now.
Yeah.
Penny, Laura, can I ask Penny a question?
Yeah.
Penny, have you shot any cookbooks in this whole time?
No. I haven't.
Is that normal for you? Like, would you typically?
I maybe shoot a cookbook a year.
Okay, right.
Only because cookbooks have changed, definitely from my perspective, they've changed from the production perspective. The cost margins aren't great. The rates for cookbooks for a photographer have never changed. In fact, they've gone down. So, I don't get as many cookbooks as maybe I did when I was earlier in my career, and when I was trying to really grow more in my food photography catalog. Mm-hmm. No, I haven't shot any cookbooks this year. No, I shot one at the beginning, like in February.
Right.
I'm curious if I think there have been some. I feel like somebody offered me a cookbook, but I wasn't able to do it.
It seems to me if photography recedes from cookbooks, what's left? It's been such a major thing in cookbooks. Is that, Francis or Jake, can you see your work going on without photography?
I think they're producing the photographs is what's happening, the authors.
Yeah, so it's twofold. I'll start off with a little anecdote because I shot my cookbook right before COVID. Like the last day of our cookbook shoot was when New York went on pause, and it was down to the very wire. And honestly, if we didn't have that shoot that week, my book definitely wouldn't be getting published in March, because there's no way it would have happened. And a perfect example is I was so focused on, we had 6 shoot days, 100 recipes. I had everything I wanted to get done. And I forewent doing an author photo because I just wanted to get all the food photos done. And if I had to use an old author photo, like, so be it. And I ended up doing this. I had this idea that I really wanted to do. It wasn't possible in COVID to do it with a photographer, or my photographer. At this point, it was over the summer. I had left New York to be with my in-laws in Florida. I ended up having my sister-in-law bought a camera. She shot me. We photoshopped it and created and it ended up getting approved and put in the book. And it's as good as it could have been given the circumstances. And that's just the kind of thing that we're moving towards. I will say, this was one thing of this campy idea in my head, a full book and the shooting and all that. I don't know. I personally couldn't do it. I know there are plenty of incredible cookbook authors and bloggers that get great deals from publishers because they agreed to develop, write, shoot, soup to nuts. But that's a very small sect. I'll say the main thing that's happened during this time is there has been this push, especially given that most of my work is in video, where all of a sudden, like Penny said about wearing many hats, I'm the talent, I'm developing the recipe, I'm now also shooting the video, sending it to whatever video team editor. So I'm like having to like run in front of the camera, say something, then run behind the camera, get another shot, and go back and forth. Then I have to deal with all these files on my phone. I have thousands of files on my phone, then like getting it into the cloud or something. But the idea behind, like, people do not want, at least in the world of video, they don't want polish, because polish means that you're kind of taking away from like what is actually safe, what is actually relatable in this time. People want something that seems as if like this is what I'm going through as well. And that's why we see such a huge like growth in I mean, I knew nothing about shooting videos, and then I like created a TikTok and now I have 500,000 followers because like people just want to have a selfie style, like, I'm making this, I'm throwing some stuff in a pot, here we go. This is not a super polished thing. Will that translate to cookbooks? I mean, I personally don't think so, because I think that's the draw of them is this lush project. I'm just looking at my computer because it's obviously stacked on a bunch of cookbooks. But it's this lush thing that's greater than the sum of its parts, because it's not just the author, but it's this creative process that goes into it in terms of the true art behind it. So, I mean, I think that's a scary thing to think about.
So what you're saying really is that there's a creeping new visual style that is far more casual and at home and handheld, and not at all what you, Penny, have specialized in all these years.
Yeah. It's not looking good for me.
But I mean, I guess my response to that would be, it's like, that's never, you can't match it. It's the conversation of even this call. People love it because we're having this conversation, but like I'm in my kitchen, you're in your living room, all this stuff. It's a very different experience than if we were all on a stage talking or in a room with microphones, and it's a different experience. Yeah. So I don't think, even if the industry moves one direction temporarily, it's not like this is going to become the new normal in the same way. It's not like Zoom acting is going to take over for a Netflix production.
Francis, what are you seeing in the books that you've got in the pipeline or that you're thinking about for a year or two hence in terms of the photography?
In terms of photography, I think and style and visual style, I mean, I think we're it's funny, right? Because we are in the way a cookbook production cycle works typically, right? Is when you acquire the title, it's usually 2 years to pub date. The author has a year to write the book and to get the art shot, and then the second year is design, sales, layout, so on and so forth. So we're always trying to position our books 2 years or a year out. So COVID, obviously no one knew this was going to happen, no one could predict it. So we didn't publish into the pandemic. We didn't make books 2 years ago figuring, the people were going to be in this totally different lifestyle. So we didn't know how to deal with it in that sense, obviously. And then knowing that the books we're buying now and the manuscripts we're editing now that will come out a year or 2 years from now, maybe this is our own Pollyanna-ish thinking, but we hoped that the books that come out a year from now will be published back into a world without COVID, or where COVID was not around the corner at every moment of your life. So in some ways, just based on our production cycle, we've kind of ignored it in a sense. Obviously, our lives are affected, the way we work is affected, and culturally, and I think this is, maybe we can get into this, maybe we're not, up to you, but culturally, I think we are seeing extraordinary shifts in our larger culture, in part because of COVID. I think the social justice movements that certainly were not created by people sitting at home, but it created an environment where so many people were at home and were trying to engage with the outside world through this, through their screens, through their phones, through their social media, whatever. I think a lot of people's attention were focused much more on the social justice movements that, you know, those movements have always existed, but they gained purchase because, in a sense, because the conditions of COVID created it so that, oh, people were like, well, people are, their heads are spinning, the whole world is turned upside down. They don't know how to engage with the world anyway. And you see obvious injustice in the world, and it feels like something you can focus on. So I do think that cultural shift, hopefully that is in fact something that we learn and grow from as a society, you know, those movements, that can inform the way that we're publishing. And I think necessarily has to inform the way we're publishing. You know, thinking about at the barest level, thinking about representation and who has had access to our industry, access to the production side of our industry, who's had cultural access and the cultural cachet that our industry builds up. Those are questions that we have needed to wrestle with for a long time. And one, so that is in one sense, like if you ask me like, oh, how's COVID changing publishing? To me, it's not even, I mean, all the stuff we talked about before about, are people cooking at home more? Do they want a different thing out of what they're cooking? You know, all that stuff is important and valid and interesting. But to me, I think the bigger thing is we are finally looking ourselves in the face as an industry. And to be fair, there have been editors and there have been houses that have recognized the seriousness of the conversation about racial equity and justice, and have tried to do the slow work of turning the Titanic, right? For years before this moment. But now I'm seeing a lot of my colleagues in the field pick up on this conversation in a way where before it felt like there were a smaller number of people who were, you know, trying to bang the drum on it. And people were like, oh yeah, that sounds great, but that sounds great, but that sounds great, but, and now it's like, there's no but.
Yeah.
There's no but.
Yeah, it's like we've all become a captive audience for this movement and thus participants in it. And that really has helped it. I think it certainly swept this industry as well as all the others. The question is, will it put down roots, or is this going to go away?
Yeah, and I do think there's a danger in the sense that there will probably be some responses that will be like, hey, let's make a few splash acquisitions right now so we can say, hey, look who we're publishing now. Look who we're publishing now. Like, we're cool. Like, we're with it. We get it. But I think the true test is, okay, let's look at what happens 4 years from now, 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Are you going to say, hey, we bought those books and we didn't actually change how we work? We just inserted some new faces? Or are you actually doing the hard work of changing how you work? And if you change how you work, then that becomes a different story, right? That becomes something that it's a long-term commitment and long-term processes rather than a few splash acquisitions.
Right. So that's really it's a good question. How do you introduce these changes into the profession in each of your professions in such a way that they do take root, as opposed to, oh, look at our new hire, or this person lost his job, but this person gained one. How do you go deeper? What kind of an assignment do you give, or what kind of long range planning do you do? I don't know, Penny, is this something that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I just would like to start by saying I think it's something we need to correct. So, I mean, I think it's the responsibility of a publisher to, you know, I feel like publishing is now about, you know, how many followers you have, and do you have an existing platform? I know it's a business. I understand it's about sales. I understand it's about book sales, but I do think that there's a little bit of responsibility that a publisher has to cultivate voices, to find voices, to represent communities, to teach us all about the world. I mean, if we pull back and think about journalism, I mean, that's what journalism does, right? It's about community. It should tell about our communities. I think publishing should do the same. And we have gotten to the point where it's, you know, it's always been about, oh, you know, this author has X amount of thousands of followers and they've got this platform. And most of the books I have done have come from authors like that, you know, and it's, you know the demographic. I don't need to tell you, but I mean, I think that's one thing. The other thing is, in terms of production, I think you have to think, I mean, I feel like I do get, every time there's a Mexican cookbook, I get asked to photograph it. And I feel like that's some tokenism, but in the same regard, I do feel like, yeah, having diversity in who photographs it is just as important in who's writing the recipe and who's writing the words, you know? And we don't have enough representation, definitely in photography and in the food world. I mean, we all know that, and that all the cracks have been revealed in the last 6 months in a big way.
So you're talking about major long-term commitments on the part of the people who make those decisions.
I am, and I think they're going to have to wager, maybe not making as much money, but doing what's right and cultivating voices and giving people a platform. I mean, we pull back. I mean, think about, you know, the book that we're all here about, you know, Julia Child's book. You know, no one knew who she was, you know, she had means, she was very smart. She went to an incredible college. She had a husband who supported her, and she was able to do the research and meet people and pay for her own culinary school in Paris and, you know, come up with this tomb of an idea and present it to, you know, an editor, because she knew people. I mean, most of us don't, you know? So yeah, I think publishers should be more responsible and really look into communities and help find those voices and help bring up those voices.
Yeah, and I think this is, thank you for saying that, Penny, and I think this is totally our responsibility. This is how, you know, this is a conversation we've been having in a very serious way at Clarkson Potter for a couple of years, and, you know, and it's again, as editors, we want to think, okay, well, what's our lever we pull in the world? Our lever is our acquisitions, right? But I think what we need to do, and what we've been doing is, again, it's slow work, but what we've been doing is thinking about all the other ways that we actually can impact the world outside of like the one button we press, right? It's not just the acquisitions, although those are important. It's, okay, especially cookbook editors, right? There are so many people involved in the making of a cookbook. The creative teams, when we hire a photographer, the photographer has assistants, the prop stylist has an assistant, so on and so forth. We have, you know, we can have an honest conversation with the photographer that we want to work with in that book. Hey, who is going to fill out your team? And if we're committing to focusing on diversity and inclusion and equity, we need you to be there with us in that commitment. We need you to commit in your hiring practices, in our hiring practice when we hire new staff, right? Like when we're talking about this, it's so easy to talk about, oh, we need more diversity, we need more diversity. Well, what does that mean? And what are like real practical, real world steps we could take to actually, in this case, help grow the talent pool, so that if we can help an assistant get a gig, a few gigs, for us, that's a great win, because 2, 3, 4 years down the line, that might be new talent we can work with to shoot a book, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I think for us, it's like, it's not just a matter of, oh, do we do the right thing, but like recognizing that doing the right thing is also good business. Like, our world is incredibly diverse, and our audience, if we have been publishing to the same audience, which is only a slice of our society, then we are, as business people, not speaking to a huge audience we could be speaking to. And as employers and as people just in the world, we're not like inviting their talent and their perspectives that can help us be better at what we do by being there with us as part of the process. So all these things are things that I think are our responsibility, and they're not just a matter of recognizing what's just in the world, although that's a huge part of it, but it's also like, you're stupid if you don't do this,
Yeah.
Like, it's just foolishness if you don't do this. And especially if it's just because, oh, that's not how we've done things. Well, what the hell is that? You're in a cult. Like, why did you get into publishing? So you could do the same shit over and over again? Or do you get into publishing because you want to make an imprint in the culture? Like, you could be selling like car tires if all you care about was just like moving units and your profit margin, right? Like, you got into publishing to impact the culture. And impacting the culture means you want to be creative. And being creative means you're bringing in perspectives that you don't already know. Like, that's what it all means to me anyway. And I feel like this is a huge part of our responsibility. And it's a huge part of like what you just should do, because like, why did you get into this in the first place?
Are you noticing a shift, Francis? Is that happening at all? Starting to?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it is. Well, okay, so most people
just from the like who they're cultivating and finding those voices.
Yeah, and I think yeah. I mean, like, look, it is, again, like, it is long-term work, and these are all things that we have to do over, a time span we're talking about of years, multiple years. But I mean, one key thing that I've been involved in, certainly within Clarkson Potter and also within the larger sort of Random House family, is, folks on this Zoom will totally know about comps, right? Like, how do you acquire a book? The first thing you do is you look, traditionally for most houses, the process is you look at comp titles. What were like books that sold well in the past? Literally, their first step in acquiring a book is copycat, right? Like, that's the idea. Show me that this has worked before, and I'll cut the check to make it work again. And whatever, or the entire, like, as long as I've known it, that's how publishing has worked, and we've had great books. It's not like, great books were not made on a system, but it also very obviously sets an institutional bias for status quo, right? Literally what we were saying is, I will spend the money on this to buy this book if it has worked before. So a huge part of the conversation we're having internally is, how do we get to justifying and making arguments for acquisition that do not rely on comps? And that, I mean, it seems like a small thing, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, when you actually start like changing the direction of how the river flows, like, you start fertilizing whole different fields, right? So that's one example. And another example, like I talked about before, like, we have a notion at Potter of, we want to make sure that our creative partners are committed to this work as well. We want to make sure their teams are hiring. They're doing their best to create opportunity and to give opportunity to emerging voices in their field, or people who are from marginalized communities in their field. And other things like that. Like, if you start thinking about all the millions of ways you touch a book, that you have control in some way as a publisher over a book, what are all the ways that you can make choices that feed into that larger goal of how do we help build the talent pool and build the pool of opportunity?
Jake, it seems as though you have a good position here, because your work model is so flexible and so open-ended, because it comes out of your crowdsourced group, the crowdsourced product that you're actually coming up with. You have to listen to people. You are responsive to people. So what's happening at the Feedfeed?
I mean, I'll be totally candid. I recently left Feedfeed, so I am not working there anymore. But at the same time, it's really a perfect parallel to the industry as a whole. Because what Penny and Francis both said resonated so much with me. And I guess in terms of looking at what I'm hopeful for, we're seeing this democratization of food media through alternative channels. If you look at, like, traditionally, like, how do you make your name in the food world? All right, you make a restaurant, or you become an editor at a magazine, things like that. You start writing about food, which, I mean, the barrier to entry on either side is absolutely disgusting. When I think about, like, my early days in food media, I mean, I had to do an unpaid internship because this was before the Condé Nast lawsuit. And so I had to recognize my privilege in the sense that I was able to be supported to live in New York, to make no money. And then my first salary as a staff job was was $30,000 living in New York City, which is wild, but that's also commonplace. Every person I know has this exact same story, parallel. And all it says is that we've created these opportunities only for a real select group of people who are able to afford them. And that just creates this incredibly vicious cycle of who is then able to get in and start to work their way up in food media. The response to that, I think, is the fact that those traditional publications are oftentimes becoming obsolete. And we saw this first wave of social media, which is also very much, there are two sides to that coin in the sense of social media is terrible in so many ways. And I think we saw that in this first wave of the influencer, which was this like super the bikinis on beaches, eating giant pizzas and all that stuff that really is not representative of quality, but just visually, I don't know, I would relate it to like reality television. But we are really seeing this like second wave in the sense of people want relatable, aspirational, yet attainable voices that they can relate to. And we're seeing this with Darius Williams, with Tabitha Brown. These are diverse voices that are using social media to share their love of food in these new ways and gathering audiences larger than a lot of these traditional publications have for their own social media platforms. So it just becomes this easy next step in the sense of, great, these are these new voices, this new class of food authorities. And I guess my final point on that is, I think my favorite part of this personality-driven push is we are recognizing there's this human element to it. I hate that in food media there becomes this burden on someone to represent a culture or a background, and just the idea of someone being able to represent an entirety of a nation or a culture or group, like that's ridiculous. I do a lot of like writing about, like I said, again, beating a dead horse, about Jewish food. I'm Ashkenazi. My husband is Persian Iraqi. I write about this kind of blending of families and cultures and traditions that I'm inheriting from my family as well as from his family. That being said, I have a limited experience about Moroccan Jewish food, about Yemeni Jewish food, and it's no different than if someone writes about Italian food and they are from the South and aren't as familiar with stuff in the North, or Latin America. There's just so many variations. And I think this idea of moving away from someone's an expert on a cuisine, and instead it's like they're a personality that I relate to, and it doesn't really matter what they are cooking. I am there to learn from them. And I just think that that's going to be the future, is moving away from like the labels.
Well, what you're saying is really great, all of this, and really pertinent to the things that I think we're all tremendously interested in. It's time now to throw this open and see if there are some questions from the outside world. I'm looking at the chat, and when somebody has a question, post it up there. And while we're waiting for a second, I just had one more thing to ask you until I see a question pop up, and that is, are you nervous about the future? I don't mean just in the outside world where we're all pretty terrified, but in your own professional world, the things that you see coming up on the horizon, do they make you wake up in the night in a cold sweat, or do you see some bright sides and some optimism, some reasons for optimism? And if you do, could you please share them? I mean, Jake, you've talked about the new opportunities coming up that you see all around you. Are the rest of you seeing some of this, or anything good?
I literally cannot sleep at night because the world is both literally and figuratively burning. So I don't know if I'm a great person to answer this question, but for optimism, I think it's what I was saying before. I think all those things that I expressed are conversations that I have had within my office anyway, and they're not only met with acceptance and tolerance, it's met with enthusiasm. It's met with a great sense of, yes, that should be our purpose. and those ideas of equity and representation, again, are not just social buzzwords, HR buzzwords. They are real ways of trying to rectify literally hundreds of years of injustice in our world. And hey, guess what? It also means we'll get better at what we do. Like, that's pretty awesome. Again, not to be like weird, like colonial capitalist about it. It's like, oh, we can make money doing it. Like, although, I'll say that to the person I need to say that to, whatever, to cut the checks to let us do the work. But again, the fact is, if you got into this world because you want to make a living and make an impact on the culture, you got in this world because you wanted to be creative, that fundamentally means you got into this world because you wanted to learn about things you didn't know about, and you want to hear from people who are not you. That has to be what it means, right? And if you recognize that and you look around, you think, why have we been so, well, we know why, but we have been so derelict in our responsibilities, not just to the world and to our industry, but to ourselves as creative people, in not seeking out as many viewpoints and helping those people tell their stories. But I don't know. I've been in this industry for almost 8 years, and I've never gotten bored. But now I look at, having this conversation with people around me, like, I feel like this, and this is an industry where you can look next to you and, oh, you've been in this for 8 years. You've been in this for 26 years. Like, this is very common. Like, publishing an industry where people go into and they don't come out of. It's like a crypt. But seeing how we can reinvigorate ourselves as professionals and as creative people by recognizing that what we need to do is also the right thing in the world is something that gives me great energy.
Okay, well, that is some encouragement. Penny, I see a question here for you. What is the most unique dish or meal that you have photographed outside the United States?
I have to say that most of what drives me in my work is the people that make the food, the culture around the food, and how people gather, how they connect around the food, where they do it, how they prepare it, and what happens around the table. So for me, it's, I'm happiest when I'm with people that are living closest to the land, so I saw that in the chat and I immediately thought of this dish in Senegal called cheboujen. It's like I guess it's like maybe paella, but it's that's the only thing I can really think that maybe it's similar to, but it's got a ton of different seafood because Senegal is right on the coast. And the fishermen come early in the morning and these colorful boats along the shore, and the market, the fish market there is right along the skyline. So it's a pretty incredible city for that purpose alone, and you can drop immediately into local culture, local food culture, just by going to that fish market. It's incredible. Once we're all out of lockdown, we need to go there. It's pretty amazing. I would say cheboujen, find a local family who's willing to invite you into their home, and it'll be, typically you sit on the floor, it's a big metal bowl and everybody's eating with their hands, and it's beautiful.
It is the anti-COVID, clearly. A great image, thank you.
But can I actually say something? Because I've never been to Senegal, but I once interviewed a family who, a Senegalese family, and they told me this really beautiful thing about the Senegalese tradition of eating out of the same bowl. And he said it's because our ethic is that we always believe that the other is more important than the self. And we always believe that you're responsible for those around you. And so when you eat out of the same bowl, what you are saying to yourselves and to each other is that we are all responsible for one another. And I think that is such a profound and extraordinarily important thing to know and to think about and to like sort of take into your soul, you know?
Yes, that is also a great image. We have a question. Do you have, or what would you say is the life-changing cookbook that has come into your world? Jake?
It was, and I write about this, and I've written about this a few times. It was a few months into dating my husband, and I came to my apartment, and there was like this giant Amazon box, and it was from my mother-in-law, and it was a rice cooker and a copy of Najmieh Batmanglij's Food of Life, which is like the Bible of Persian food. And it's here, I got it right up. It's thick.
Oh.
And it was just this like subtle hint of like, start learning and start cooking for my son. And it was something that obviously I was already like, I was so excited to do. But I think what was so integral was then seeing like how it integrated into like ceremony and ritual. So you think about the concept of like our first Passover Seder shared together, where he came to his first Ashkenazi Seder, which was very like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and then I went to his first, which is very Shahs of Sunset, and it's the idea of these two situations that are parallel yet completely different based on culinary tradition. And that's not a uniquely or inherently Jewish thing. That's something that you could see in the same of a New Yorker marries a Texan, or anything in the sense of how we use food to celebrate the same things. So this book will always be very close to my heart.
Oh my God, you married into the right family.
Truly.
You found your mate, your true mate.
Great. Francis, do you have a life-changing cookbook?
Oh boy. It would be, I mean, would it be crass to talk about a book I worked on?
Not if it changed your life. It's appropriate.
I mean, God, there are so many. The one that keeps popping in my head right now is Jubilee by Tony Tipton Martin. Is a book that came out last fall, maybe 2 falls ago. Well, okay, one thing I have to admit about being in publishing is I literally never know what year it is anymore. And I don't, because it's always like, oh, that's a fall 22 book. Okay, my head is in fall 22 now. And, oh no, that was fall 18. I'm like, isn't that right now? No, that was 2 years ago. Anyway, Tony Tipton Martin's Jubilee is an extraordinary book. Tony is a fascinating person, a wonderful person, was actually just named the new editor-in-chief of Cook's Country magazine and America's Test Kitchen, and has been a food journalist for many years. And she was the first African-American food editor of a daily paper in the United States, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, in the 90s. And she has this extraordinary personal library of cookbooks written by African Americans, going back literally to the very first one. She had, it's 200 years of culinary history told by, literally told by Black cooks. And this is a history that really is not apparent in the mainstream. This is not a story that the rest of us have told ourselves, even though these are cooks, as you read their cookbooks, as you see her research, have invented so much of what we think of as American cuisine. So Jubilee is, so she wrote this beautiful book a few years ago called The Jemima Code, which was sort of technically a bibliography of her library, introducing each book and why that author mattered, their mark on culinary history. And Jubilee is sort of the cookbook version of the book, taking recipes from those original texts, modernizing so we can actually cook them today, but giving you the story, the history, where she got this recipe from. And when you read it, it's a great cookbook, but as you read it, you also recognize, here is, it's like, oh, the People's History of the United States, right? It's like, this is sort of like that for cookbooks. Like, this is American culinary history told by people who did so much of the cooking, but were never seen and were never recognized for it. And so, I worked on it, so I read it like 9 times. But, in so many ways, it turned my head around and what I understand American cuisine is. The other book that I always say in this context is one I didn't work on. It came out before I was born, but it's Taste of Country Cooking by Edmund Lewis, for a very similar reason, in the sense that reading it today, you recognize how much of our contemporary food culture, and we value our contemporary food culture, was something that a woman who was the granddaughter of enslaved people felt so deeply in her bones: the artistry, the craft, seasonality. And it's just an extraordinarily lyrical, beautiful, in some ways subversive read. It's just an extraordinary book on every level.
Penny, how about you? And also there's another question, maybe related to a life-changing cookbook, which is that in your move from Brooklyn to Texas, has that opened your mind up to any kind of new culinary project?
Oh, my dad's over there, like, probably so elated. I didn't move to Texas.
Or your visit?
I just came to be with him and help him. Wait, in my move here, was there something related to food that might be of interest?
Have you discovered, and being in Texas now, of course you've just gotten there really, but have you discovered something in the food that kind of, lights up your imagination?
I mean, I just keep thinking about the people that are cooking for other people right now, the people that are working in restaurants, the people that are delivering food. I keep thinking about what that looks like. What's their life like, I find that interesting. I don't know if anybody wants to see that, that's always been my dilemma, is I'm so interested in people's, like, their blood, sweat, and tears, but that doesn't necessarily always interest, the mainstream. My favorite cookbook, I don't know that I have one. I met one of my favorite people in the world photographing her cookbook. It's Stella Parks. She braved heart. She's a pastry chef. She's a beautiful person and a very dear friend. So I'm going to say her book because, she worked her heart out on it. And I think she, it was a difficult experience for her. And she also made a beautiful book. I felt like it was, for me, from a photographic standpoint, it was kind of maybe one of my better books that I got to photograph. I also got to work with a wonderful, legendary, albeit challenging editor, Maria Garnicelli, which we all have our stories, I'm sure. So I say that with so much love. So I'd say Stella's book, Braveheart. And also I wanted to say, Francis, I appreciate your just your excitement about where we could go once we're done with this. At the beginning of this, I was like, oh, this is gonna, there's gonna be a gap, and there's opportunities here, and this is the moment to strike. And that was like, right in March and April, and by around July, I was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen next? And yeah, I'm not really sure. I think it's gonna be a minute before we really know what's gonna happen or how this is all gonna work out. I do think, at least for me personally, it's making me, ask a lot of harder questions about, like, how do I really want to be living my life right now?
I wonder if that's going to be one of the big outcomes of this year. So a lot of people will ask those questions. We're past our time. I want to thank you all. You've been so thoughtful and interesting and raised so many good points and good ideas. I have learned a huge amount from you. So thank the three of you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And sure enough, we had a break in. Hi. Say hi, bud.
I just want to add my thanks. It has been marvelous and interesting, and you've given me a lot of food for thought, no pun intended. And it's really been so exciting. And who knows, we might ask you all to come back for a little recap once this is all over. A little look back, if you will. But Laura, you did a fabulous job keeping things going, and I can't thank you all enough, really. So I wish you all a good evening, and be safe, and thank you again.
Okay, thanks very much. Good night, all.
Good night.